Welcome, Ed Muzika, to Raw and
Hi.
Cooked Vegan.
How are you, Paul?
Very well, very well. So go ahead and just cut me off anytime. I'll go for as long as you have time. These usually they can run up to an hour, but if you need to go, just whistle. The first question I have is, how were you raised? How did in terms of diet, was your family very conscious about diet or nutrition?
Not at all. I was raised in Cleveland, Ohio, which is, you might say, 14th century Europe, a feudal society, about 600 years behind the times. And it was a regular meat and potatoes kind of upbringing.
Okay, all right. And I take it, we're going to talk a little bit later about your spiritual life, but were you having spiritual inclinations at an early age, and did this at all affect your diet?
Yeah, it did. Probably beginning around age 9 or 10. But it didn't affect my diet until I decided to leave the secular life behind and become a monk, a wandering monk at probably age 25, 26, at which time I became a vegan. And but the period up to that time was one of going through graduate school after graduate school in different subjects like management. I got a BA in philosophy, a master's in management. I was working on a doctorate in urban economics at Wayne State, and I never busted out of the 14th century mold until I decided working one day when I was looking out over Lake Erie from an office working for the county doing population statistics for Cleveland statistical area. I had my feet up on the windowsill and I saw boats going by, sailboats. And I said, what the fuck am I doing here? I mean, I didn't like the job. They lied to the feds in order to get more money. It was an absolutely corrupt situation, and they used my expertise to back up their lies. So I gave it all up, got a job on the boat on the Great Lakes for one summer, working on the decks. And one thing I found, I took 3 books, Ramana's Who Am I?, 3 Pillars of Zen with Kapleau, and one other I can't remember right now. But one thing I discovered is you'll never attain enlightenment working on a boat, because it's 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you're too tired to do any meditation or read anything. And if they catch you reading anything, they probably throw you over the side, because they're in the 12th century, the people that work on boats.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, at what age did you do this kind of boat apprenticeship, maybe you call it?
I just finished a master's degree, probably 24.
You know, this is such a huge thing that you're saying, because you wonder how many people just never really consider the ethical aspects of what they're doing. You know, I think most, by far, the majority of people, they just swept up into this kind of economy, culture, and they do it, and it's like you're saying, you know, my work was contributing to this unethical system. Anyway, you know, beautiful recognition there. So, okay, so you worked on this boat. It was pretty crazy, and were you vegan while you were working on the boat?
No, I had no way. I was working in the steward's office as much as on the deck, so it was meat and potatoes. The real change came about 2 years later, after being in the desert. I was meditating in the desert near where my brother lived in Tucson, and I saw the desert creatures close up, the rattlesnakes, the little insects, the centipedes, and all of the others. And it was just kind of disturbing to see how they lived, because there was death everywhere. And I know there's death everywhere, but it's a little less brutal when you don't have to be confronted by it day by day. Seeing the roadkill in the Tucson highways. But what really happened is when I turned into Zen, decided I was going to go all the way in Zen, and I just gave it up, just overnight. practiced by myself, practiced meditation and so forth. But then I started going to various Zen centers like Philip Keplo's in New York, Sasaki Roshi at Mount Baldy Zen Center, then the International Buddhist Meditation Center in Los Angeles with Thich Thich Nhat, and the Normandy Zen Center, or I guess it was called the LA Zen Center, with Maizumi Roshi. And everybody was vegetarian, so I fit right in because I had been a vegan for a couple of years, except every now and then Tianan would play a joke on us. He always prepared the soups on Saturday for the communal meal. And once in a great while, maybe once a year, he'd put a chicken in it.
Just to freak everybody out?
Just to freak everybody out. But I lapsed back into being a meat eater after about 9 or 10 years of being a vegetarian. Not a lot of meat. But then about 20 years ago, I saw a video on television of a pig being slaughtered in by two men inside of a railroad car by slitting its throat and holding it down and describing how it was dying, drowning in its own blood and the squealing. And it was just so horrible. It just changed my life completely. And this time, when I became a vegetarian, it was strictly out of compassion, not because everybody else was doing it in Zen, or I was doing it in order to purify my body and make it more spiritual. But once again, I was confronted with the horror of killing for food. And it struck so deep in me. And when I gave it up and pushed it up and became sort of, what would you call it, a veggie Nazi.
Yeah. I have some of that in me.
I felt such a relief emotionally, like a huge weight of guilt lifted from me, and I felt lighter, and I felt cleaner, and I felt better about myself. It's like this shadow of guilt and horror had been constantly with me in that period of 20 years or so when I was eating meat.
Wow.
And or 10 years or so, that I don't know exactly what it is, that I was eating meat. My regret for doing it, and then the guilt lifting when I stopped doing it and became a veggie Nazi.
Beautiful, beautiful.
I'm not a veggie Nazi anymore. I don't punch people anymore when I eat a meatball sandwich.
I like it. I like it. All right. Let me ask you, in retrospect, could you generally characterize for the viewers your health as you went through these various dietary transitions? Was your health much affected by any of these changes that you made?
I can't say.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. Although, looking back, I know my body felt lighter when I was a vegetarian. But because I wasn't a very good vegetarian in terms of balancing proteins and so forth the first time, I got weaker the last couple of years of being a vegetarian, and I didn't know why. I knew about balancing, but I really wasn't paying enough attention to eating. I was just eating to live. I wasn't eating in a wise way. And when I went back to some meat, I think I felt better and stronger. And I just continued as a habit.
Yeah.
Now that I know what to eat and how to combine foods and watch what I eat, it's much different. It's a lot easier.
Interesting. Very interesting. Now, if you'll allow me, I'd love to backtrack a little, because this sounds
Sure.
like a very interesting time in your life when you left the Midwest and started. You became a sadhu in the United States.
Yes.
So now this was not a common thing, right? So
Back then it was the 14th century. And there weren't many European sadhus back in the 14th century. I mean, there was St. Francis in the 16th century, but times had changed. It was already the Renaissance.
Well, can you tell, how did you survive? And it's just fascinating. I mean, you mentioned, being in near Tucson and meditating in the desert, and did you have times where you had nothing to eat for several days? Would you always?
No, I always had provisions.
Okay.
And I could always go to my brother's house. It was about a mile's walk, and there was water. He had a water tank and so forth. So there was no problem there.
You know who you're reminding me of is Muktananda, and I think he described traveling around India and putting dirt in a cloth and running water through it to get minerals out of the mud.
Muktananda was something else. I met him later on, back in 1980. For 6 months, I was one of his security guards, one of his bodyguards.
Oh, interesting. So we'll have to, if you want to, we can talk about that. But, one of the things I love about you, Edji, is you've got this beautiful mixture of the Zen Buddhist thing and the Indian Advaita thing, and I think that's so powerful because it gives you a nice, you can be objective on both systems.
Right.
So for a few years you did this kind of nomadic, sadhu life, and would you say that you probably don't look at spiritual development in these terms anymore, but did it feel like progress was being made, or?
No, it felt absolutely, the more I practiced, the less I understood, the less I had a clue as to what was going on. You study under 5 different Zen masters. Each one is different, comes from a different culture. Each has a different approach. And in Zen, usually you don't get a philosophy. You get koans, you get puzzles to clear your mind of any kind of understanding whatsoever. So I became uninformed, increasingly uninformed as I progressed in Zen, because I was trying to figure out what the Heart Sutra meant. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Feeling, thought, and consciousness are also like this. You see, the Heart Sutra is the center of most Zen practice. And it is a dialogue between Avalokiteshvara and somebody else about the nature of reality. And they're talking about form comes out of emptiness, and emptiness is pervaded by forms. They don't make a distinction of which is primary. Is emptiness primary? No. Is forms primary? No. They're equal, co-equal, but so much in spirituality nowadays puts the emphasis on emptiness and on the void and on nothingness and becoming nobody and no self. But that's not what Zen is at all, because although they didn't believe in the concept of self, it was forms, either internal forms or external forms, and then there was emptiness, which the forms changed and changed and changed and disappeared into emptiness eventually and arose from emptiness. So they were equal, and there wasn't the neti of denying life as there is in Advaita, for example, where all that you want to know is the absolute and get to be the witness and go beyond consciousness. Although Zen recognized that consciousness itself disappeared into emptiness, there wasn't a downplaying of it like Nisargadatta and some of the others did, saying consciousness and human is bad, I want to disappear into the witness. And of course people like Nisargadatta that disappear into the witness were meat eaters, and the Tibetans too, or the monks were meat eaters.
I didn't know Nisargadatta ate meat, but I did. I know he was a smoker. I knew that.
Yep.
And owned a tobacco shop, which was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, got throat cancer from it too.
So that's fascinating. So would you say your conclusion is that it doesn't? You need not emphasize one over another. They're
absolutely.
They're just
even more. I met my primary teacher after many years of searching, 27, in the form of Robert Adams in Los Angeles in 1989. He was living in the valley here near where I live now, and he was pure Advaitin. Robert was the most extraordinary person I've ever met. He was not in this world. He would walk, and he didn't bump into things, but He was not in this world. Nothing affected him. He told us one day when I came to pick him up to go to lunch that the pipes had broken the night before in his condo. The floors were flooded. There was a repairman fixing the pipes, another repairman rolling up the carpets and drying it. So they had 6 people inside that were workers, his hysterical wife and 2 hysterical daughters, and friends that had dropped by, and everybody was in utter chaos. And he just came to the door and smiled and pointed back to the chaos there and then told me about what had happened. He was totally unmoved by all of this. But he was a denier of life. He was saying, leave the world alone. Don't touch the world. He was also a vegan and had been for all of his life since the age of 11 when he saw his grandmother kill a chicken. And he was so horrified by it that he pondered it for many, many months about the horror of the world and came to the conclusion this world was too horrible to be real. And he held on to that to the rest of his life, that the world was not real. He said the earth is the lowest of all hells. And I feel that from time to time. It certainly is true for me. To see that kind of suffering, the murder, the killing, the capitalist abusing of other people, it's just horrifying. And his way of escape was to go inside and to find the self, the deep self, the bliss, Satchitananda, where he spent most of his time. And he recognized my enlightenment as...
Can you still hear me?
I kind of lost you there a little bit, but...
All right. Okay, now how about that?
That's better, yeah.
All right, so I taught his way for about 15 years after he died. And then in 2010, I fell in love.
Ah.
And I fell in love with this very energetic woman. And all kinds of extraordinary things began to happen to both of us.
Wow.
The subtle body energies were awakened in both of us, like fire and energies and a volcano inside. I felt the descent of grace in the form of golden light. I felt the ascent of power and white light that felt like the divine as an other. It was so powerful, so pure, so white, and so intense that I knew it couldn't be me because it was far beyond anything I had ever experienced. And these kinds of things, the energy fields I began to feel within me and without me, the external magnetic fields, all these kinds of things. I could feel electrical wires in the walls. But she had experienced similar sort of things. And then when we finally broke up, what happened is I had an experience of self-realization, which was different from the Advaita, from Roberts, which was to see the unity of God and man inside of themselves. It was like, instead of being up here, transcendent, looking down as the observer in absolute peace and bliss at the rest of life, not having anything to do with it, it was a plunge back into the body and into the subtle body. And then it became an incarnational spirituality as opposed to a transcendental spirituality.
Wow.
That white light that I had seen so many times exploded in me and was shaking me and rose in power inside of me. And I saw it as God, as something other, because it was so more powerful. But at the same time, I recognized it was also myself. There was myself recognizing itself in that experience. And that other self that was arising was what I had always thought of as God before. So I had this experience 5 times, because we broke up at least 50 times. And it stayed with me. After each one, something new. And since that time, the energies have been continuous. That's what I do in satsang, is circulate these Shakti energies to everybody, and they go into bliss. And they're all vegetarians. Most of them are vegans. And it's kind of transformative because I teach love and energies, especially love. loving everything that arises in yourself, anything that comes out of introspection, all the horror that comes up, the depression, the anger, memories of guilt, and all of that, just to love everything that arises and allow it to identify with it and incorporate that into a greater sense of presence. And it works for me. And I still, of course, am a little bit of a veggie Nazi.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. So you're making me think of this long journey that you had. First being a sadhu, then all these variations of Zen Buddhism, and then Robert Adams, and you could say like a very keen Advaita aspect to your life, and then now this kind of new phenomena.
Downward going into the flesh.
Right. Is
like,
there? You're reminding me.
Like what's its name? The Old Zen Thing, returning to the marketplace.
Yes, that's what I was just about to ask you. Yes. So there's like I think is it in Zen there's a variety of levels that the aspirant passes through, and the final one is coming back down from the mountain, right?
Yes, exactly. Matter of fact, Sansanim, one of my teachers, also talked to it like this, but he did it in terms of the degrees of the circle, saying you started at 0 degrees as an ordinary putz, and going to practice 90 degrees, 180 degrees, realizing emptiness and the unity experience, and then going through a period of magic. And I guess he's talking about what I experienced, the energies flowing, the grace, the falling to the feet falling to the feet of God and just worshiping God because he's so or she's so powerful and so anointing. The descent of grace, becoming so humble in the presence, and then seeing that is in everybody, which is returning to 0 degrees, and once again saying, now, hey, what do I do with this? How do I help people? Well, for one thing, I help them become vegetarians by beating them about the head and face.
Well, you know what? Another thing I love about you, Edji, is it's kind of popular among some maybe they're called neo-Advaitins, I don't know, and they like to kind of poo-poo anything.
Exactly.
And that would include being vegan, or they kind of poo-poo having any kind of, I don't know, reliable foundation in the material world. Right. And what I love about you is you said, look, part of this thing is respecting sentient beings, and it's only going to enhance your experience. So I love that. And it also seems like it's kind of a basic level of consciousness. It's like you reach a certain level of consciousness and you're not inclined to hurt animals the way they're being harmed by people, you know? So, and while I'm here, it just keeps coming to my mind, and I want you to share it with the viewers, is this program you do with the cats. So you've been saving cats for like, I don't know how many years, and it's just such a beautiful, simple thing you're doing. Can you tell us a little bit how it manifested and how it evolved?
Well, after I discovered a long time ago, back in the 1990s, that I wanted to do something to help the world and recognize how small I was, how little power I actually had. And I decided, well, what can I do? And I said, well, it's got to be something simple. It's got to be something that I can do, actually do. And it's got to be something immediately around me rather than raising money for starving children in India. It has to be right within my immediate environment, to try to transform that environment by making it a little easier for sentient beings. And I was living in Santa Monica at the time, and there were feral cats living at the park at the beach. And I saw some plates there somebody was feeding, and I saw that there were feral cats up and down the beach, and I began feeding in 1992. Then we had the great earthquake in 1994, which caused the loss of thousands of cats because their houses were destroyed.
Huh.
And so the number of cats I began taking care of climbed alarmingly. And then I found out, really, wealthy people, and not only wealthy people, but people of all walks and means often hate you feeding cats in their neighborhood because they don't like cats.
Huh.
And I ran into immense numbers of legal problems and being pursued by the police, by animal services, threatened by the city government of Santa Monica. The cats were threatened that they were going to come in and shoot them with darts and take them away and euthanize them. And I fought them. And I had 300 people that helped me fight them by calling City Hall incessantly until City Hall gave up and told me it was okay. They even sent me a letter saying what you're doing is not illegal, but it's a health hazard and has to stop at some point. And they never touched me after that.
Wow, that's incredible.
I went in for a meeting with the city manager and the city attorney. And I was practically crying at that time because they had detectives after me, animal services after me. People, the neighbors of the people that were complaining would loose their dogs on the feral cats. And it was just awful with stress. And the city attorney, when I told her that I'd been going to that park for 14 years, just dropped it. And she says, there's nothing illegal what he's doing. That's his neighborhood. He's been going there for 14 years. And people had threatened to sue the city for not getting rid of the cats because the cats had fleas and the fleas could pass along disease to the babies and children. So they were threatening that kind of lawsuit. That's why the city acted. But then they gave up, and I called one time, and they said 700 people had called that day from all over the world telling them to leave Ed and his cats alone. Not only the 300 people, but the 300 people had talked to other people in other countries. And 700 in one day. Next day there was something like 500.
I love it. I love it. Now, is part of your program, did I see this, that you also do try to fix the cats?
Yes.
That's part of it. So, yeah, so you're feeding them so that they won't starve to death, and you're controlling the population growth when possible by getting them fixed.
Yes, they're not always easily caught though.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of diseases and injuries, and so and when I can, I treat the diseases like with antibiotics and things like that. But beyond that, my budget is busted by all the vet bills.
Well, it's such a beautiful thing, and why don't we say here, it's intimately tied with your website. Your website is it wearesentience.com?
Correct.
Yeah, I love that. And can you define for the viewer what does sentience mean? And now I know this is a huge thing, but perhaps the way you see it, and could you also make a distinction between the sentience of an animal and a human being and a plant? Can you talk a little bit about those distinctions?
Well, I see no difference in the sentience of an animal and a human being. Any animal, whether it's an insect, anything that can move around, and a human being, it's just seen through 2 eyes in a mammal versus 100 eyes in a bee, or whatever it is. No eyes in a worm, 2 eyes in a bear. We have different sense apparatuses of the various sentient beings to take in the world. So the world is very different from being to being in the sense that what is perceived and how it is perceived is different. And I know this. I go into these beings and try to feel how they experience life. And it's different from being to being. I really know cats, and I know some other kinds of beings, but I know people that do it more regularly, and they tell me what it's like from the inside. But I'll tell you something else. If you're a vegetarian, and if you're sensitive to other beings, and these psychic powers develop like I had in me from falling in love,
yeah,
and feeling God, you feel that sentience by looking into their eyes. And there's a bonding there that is so deep with other sentient beings. It could be a bird, it could be a squirrel, especially cats, because cats love to stare into your eyes. And it's easiest to share it with a cat. and to feel their sense of presence from the inside, because over time, through the spiritual practices and meditation on the I Am, your own sense of presence sort of grows out of your heart and expands through your body and extends beyond your body in an energy field. And you can feel the energy fields of others, and you can feel them. There's a cat right next to me over here. You can see them.
All right. Hello there. Well,
that's Radha.
Radha, all right. All right.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I got you back. Yep.
So there's no difference. And here's an interesting point before we move on to the vegetables. You know, we don't see the world the way it really is. What we do is we see through 5 or 6 different senses. And the eyes go to the retina, and the retina converts it into electrical impulses, which fires the nerves, which go, optic nerve, to the brain, where over a period of several years we learn how to interpret it in order to get around obstacles. But there's a very narrow range of colors that we see. We don't see ultraviolet, we don't see infrared, we don't see radio waves, we don't see X-rays. Same thing with touch. We touch something, and the nerves in the skin convert it into electrical impulses, which go and travel to the brain, and once again, it's interpreted. Same thing with hearing, taste, smell, and the internal kinesthetic sense that you develop when you lead a spiritual life. When you are a vegetarian, when you are practicing meditation, the inner emptiness opens and it's filled with light, and you can see the inner world very clearly. But somehow you realize that you are consciousness. You are sentience, which is aware of that external world. But we don't see the external world. It's like consciousness somehow can read those electrical impulses and the perceptions of the brain and converts it into conscious experiences. So we're not the body, and we're certainly not the electrical impulses, but we're that which receives those electrical impulses and turns it into conscious experience. And the body is like an instrument, like a car, an automobile, and we're the pilot inside of it that gets all of these feedback and allows us to go through life. And I often imagine, what is it like to be in the vehicle of a worm? What is it like to be in the vehicle of an eagle? And I play with it. I think everybody should play with it, just to feel more companionship with all beings. Now about plants, I don't know. I don't know what their inner life is. I can't identify with it, but I'm very respectful of them. I assume that they have some sort of rudimentary consciousness or awareness because of all the experiments that have been done showing how they trope. And I can watch them I used to be able to watch a blade of grass trope towards the sun as it went across the sky, and if it went clouded, it'd sort of go down like this, and when the sun come out, it'd go like this again. And I felt the life form in it. I felt the life in the tree. But I really don't know. It's too beyond me to feel what it would like to be a tree.
Okay. You know, so many things came up as you were telling me what you just did, and one of them was there's this funny inability or a kind of chasm between a devout scientific atheist and a theist who has had experience which the atheist has not had. And I think you're a wonderful example of that. It's like you can't really, to someone who's never had these experiences, you can't really communicate. I mean, you can try to describe it, but and you can see how they would be an atheist because they've never had the experience.
Yes.
So and I love this thing that you just elucidated, and I want you to say it again so I can get it better in my head. And it's that there's experiences you've had, and maybe that's not even the right vocabulary to use, because you as an individual are not it's like you have realized that your consciousness is more than what appears to be contained in your body. And even this experience of you're saying this field of your
presence.
sense of self has gone beyond your own physical body, but even beyond that, I think what you were pointing to is that this principle that operates you, or operates this body that looks like Edji, it's different than what is contained in Edji. Yeah? Well, that's misleading.
That's getting a little too metaphysical for me.
Okay.
Because from my new realization, I localize consciousness. The consciousness in me is the same as, well, let's say the life force, the Shakti in me is the same as in a rat, a cat, or in you. The emptiness is the same, although we may not all perceive it. I know a lot of people don't perceive emptiness. But the quality of sentience, of being able to feel, feeling the life force within and the sense data from without, and living in the life force, that's the same for all. But the life force really, there's a strange connection between it and the body and the experiences of the body. And nobody's ever really explained consciousness. They can say it arises in the brain, but what does that mean? I mean, how does the insubstantial thing with no weight, no mass arise in the brain? I'm saying we have the nervous system which somehow communicates with consciousness as something different from matter. And it could be the consciousness that descends from God that infuses all of us. Or it could be, like Nisargadatta says, something of the chemical reactions of a living body produces consciousness. I don't know, but there is the interplay between consciousness and our energetic field, the nerves within and the sense of presence without, which is part of our consciousness. Now, the energy field I feel, as opposed to the nervous system, which I don't feel. That's speculation. I can transfer that energy to you. I could transfer that energy to anybody and hopefully do some healing with it. Hopefully make them feel my sentience, my love, my compassion for all sentient beings, and make them feel that and help people in that way. But even more, to be able to help them physically is what I most desire now, how to be a healer, how to use these energies.
And as you said, when you hold a satsang, you feel that you have the ability to do this, or that
everybody does it.
Right.
We all work together, holding hands imaginatively. We all feel the life force going through us and twirling around the heart and then going out the other side. And people go into bliss and ecstasy and just go away for a while. Okay. And it lasts for 4 or 5 days for some.
This is beautiful. And there's a topic that's coming to my mind about this that I'd like you to elucidate on for us. And that is that in a lot of spiritual practices, people develop concepts about what spiritual advancement will be like and about what spiritual experiences will be like. And then that then influences the experiences they have.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit about that phenomena where people are just creating experiences and the difference between that and a real experience?
Well, that's a complicated subject. There's a book, I think I have it underneath that cat here. It's called Stages of Mindfulness, Emptiness Meditation by some Tibetan guru, Lama. And he talks us about different kinds of experiences of emptiness and how that's interpreted by various Buddhist dharmas. And how one kind of emptiness, another kind of emptiness, and how this fits in with the Madhyika model, and etc. it's hard not to be trapped into the mold of whatever lineage you're in to have those kinds of experiences. But I'm not saying it's a bad thing at all. I think you have to be with one teacher and one method for a long period of time and dig a very deep spiritual hole with one being, and as deep as you can until you feel you at least temporarily exhausted that as a benefit to you, or you've been acknowledged as a master by a master in that particular field. Then you can branch out from there and do your own exploration and develop your own lineage, your own way of seeing things. Like what I'm doing now is combining transcendental and incarnational spirituality, bipolar, going to the absolute and then returning to the body and to the marketplace. This is relatively new. And I emphasize the return more than the transcendence because I was with Robert for many years, and I saw how people tend to fade away, and some became very depressed because they left the world and they were looking for that enlightenment experience that would blow away everything and release them. But in fact, they just got more and more depressed and empty and bored. And there was a lot of suicides around Robert's students because where it took them was nowhere, nothingness. They became lost in nothingness. And nothingness is not a good place to be, as opposed to having that enlightening experience of transcendence and then returning.
You know, this brings up another topic that I'd love to hear you say something about, which is in the Buddhist tradition there is this great emphasis on emptiness. And then I frequently remember this answer that Ramana Maharshi gave to a devotee, which was go beyond the emptiness. Could you say a little something about that?
That's precisely it. Go beyond the emptiness. See, first of all, emptiness is not the ultimate. Emptiness is not the absolute. Emptiness is not the witness. Emptiness is still a phenomena. It is something we experience. And we also experience the forms within the emptiness. So both of them are tied together in consciousness. But consciousness itself disappears into the unmanifest, which is a different kind of emptiness whatsoever, because that is not experienced.
Say that again. Consciousness disappears into the unmanifest.
Okay. In Western philosophy, Immanuel Kant made the distinction between noumenal and phenomenal. Phenomenal is what appears, and noumenal is what the thing is in itself before appearance. In other words, I, in myself, am noumena. But I watch my body and I watch the world, which is phenomena. They're connected together in the nexus of the self. You might say there's a noumenal self, which cannot be seen, cannot be heard, cannot be felt, and which is entirely beyond the universe, entirely beyond consciousness. And then there's the manifest self, which I talk about and emphasize, called Atman. You must have heard the term Atman, yep. Which is what Ramana talks about, is realization of Atman, realization of the life force, the light within ourselves, God within ourselves. So there are two selves. The absolute one that Nisargadatta talks about, the witness beyond everything, and the manifest half of the self, which is the Shakti arising in us as marching together of God and my own sentience. It's God's sentience in me and my own that is by this physical body. Whether it's just God alone, I don't know, but it mostly feels like we're companions in this. And at the same time, I'm aware, and it's hard to say this, of the transcendental self, the unmanifest self, because it's like I'm resting in the unmanifest self while observing the manifest self.
Yeah,
and they're all one. They're all one.
This is beautiful. This is beautiful. And this leads me into a question I'm curious about your perception of is this transition from waking to sleep and then from deep sleep back to waking. So it's often said that at a particular level of consciousness, you're in a sense witnessing that process.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. That was my initial awakening experience with Robert in 1995. I was able to transition between dream state and awakening state, and I saw that it had no effect on me whatsoever. I was apart from it. It was like a cloud bank of sleep passed through me, and then waking passed through me, and the experiences of phenomena of the dream and the waking were absolutely different, but I was untouched by it. That was the first realization that consciousness itself is not real, or it doesn't touch me. And going to sleep, that's harder because I tend to lose all consciousness even of the sleep, but that's a different story. That's going into the causal body, and you have to read the literature in order to understand the causal body and its relation to the subtle body and to the physical body and the external world. The best book on that is the one by Siddha Rameshwar, who was Nisargadatta's teacher, called what is that? I don't remember. Siddha Rameshwar. It's all over. It's sold all over. The Master of Self-Realization.
Okay. Okay. All right.
And it's the first 85 pages is an introduction that lays out that whole system. Now, no system is absolutely true. It depends on the culture. It depends on their background. It depends on what their teachers taught them, what experiences they have them. But it's a good generic kind of thing that you can use as a touchstone to explain to others and help them understand on their way. And then you can gravitate to all kinds of different systems after you've had different kinds of experiences. Like the energy experiences, they talk about them, Siddha Rameshwar, but not in the deep and detailed way that I've experienced through falling in love and loving my own inner stuff as it arises.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And you know, one thing I often think about is as these Eastern systems have become more popular in the West, there's a lot of discussion and talk about things like chakras and nadis, but there's much more talk than there is actual experience.
Yes.
So that's a huge thing right there. And I have so many things I want to ask you, but one thing that keeps popping up is as you transition through these various Zen approaches, well, the first thing is, in the Zen tradition, there is an emphasis on vegetarianism or veganism? And,
yes.
Okay. And what was it that made you, like you reached a point with each system where you're like, okay, there's no more for me to get out of this, I'm going to go to the next one. Was that essentially what happened?
Yeah, it's different than that. I left Zen because I felt something was missing in Zen, which was heart. I mean, they talked about nature and rocks and waterfalls and ripples and the mountaintops and the wind and all that kind of shit, but nobody was talking about love. Matter of fact, Sasaki Roshi told me one time I said, I love you to Sasaki Roshi, and he turned bright red, beet red. And he was absolutely silent like that. And then he said in Japanese to this monk who translated it for me, and he said to Sasaki said, don't ever talk like that. Make a joke out of it.
Wow.
Make a joke out of it. Say something to humble the person, but don't ever say, I love you. He said, in Zen there is no love.
Wow.
And there isn't. It's all about peace and emptiness, and form is emptiness. It's kind of abstract, and there's no heart. So I immediately ran to Muktananda. My friend Shankarananda was running the ashram in 1978 in Los Angeles, and I went there and I heard this most beautiful chanting, and the men were on one side of the room and the women are on the other side of the room, and you chanted call and response to each other. You loved the feminine, and the feminine loved and invited the masculine. It went back and forth, and the chanting would make me cry and hysterical, and I'd feel such love coming up, and I'd feel the energies, a sense of presence coming up. I could also feel the emptiness, the absolute. All of this shit was arising in me without me doing anything. It was not necessary for me to practice. It was just through looking, feeling love, and feeling the energies arising in me and loving it. But then Muktananda died, and the two successors took over, and there was this internecine fight, which it just drove everybody away. And also, Muktananda really didn't tell how to reach the self. He would say constantly, love the self, honor the self, respect the self, but he never explained what the self was or how to attain it, obtain that experience of self.
You know, this is a huge point, Edji. It's like some teachers can do that and some can't. And then there's also this, maybe part of the issue is that teachers are reluctant to try and put words around it because they feel like they can't.
Yeah,
so,
they'll contaminate the experience, yeah.
Yeah. So, but Muktananda, what an amazing character. And tell us a little bit about, touching people with the peacock feather and people having Kundalini experiences. I'm sure a lot of this was just people were maybe just thinking.
Placebo effect.
Yeah.
But there is real Shaktipat, no doubt about that. I can give it myself to a certain extent to certain kind of people that are attuned to me. But back then, I didn't get it. 1,500 people a night would come to bow in front of him, 4 at a time. And he'd hit them he was on a dais about 3 feet above the rest of us. And I was at the bottom by his feet. And the successors, the same thing. And I'd come up, and when I would go up, he'd hit me on the head with maybe 3 or 4 times with the feather, large peacock feather, and other people. And then people would drop money in on his basket there, and fruit and everything else. It was extremely powerful experience emotionally, although I never got Shaktipat out of it because my Kundalini had been awakened much earlier than that, many, many years before when I was practicing in the desert.
Well, and
I'll tell you, what?
Well, I like that you said you were drawn to Muktananda when you decided you wanted love, and there was a love about him that is not, maybe uncommon among teachers. I think his heart was open, and there was a humility about him. Is that accurate?
No, there was no humility in Muktananda. He was absolutely devoid of humility, but he was empty. You could talk to him, and you could see that he was being absorbed in you. He was totally 100% with you and would lean towards you. Then the next person would come along, and he'd lean towards them. It's like he became absorbed in who was ever in his presence. But it wasn't, I'll tell you, it wasn't Muktananda that for me was taking me there. It was the ashram itself, the thousands of people there that worshipped Muktananda, that worshipped Siddha Yoga, that chanted. It was the place itself, the situation itself. I saw Muktananda often just as a buffoon, a clown acting the part, but I felt such care, being cared for while I was at the ashram. And the people that were the staff there were weird. They were silent, they were not happy, they were frowning, had a bad attitude. But the ashram itself, and even larger when Muktananda was in town, the huge tent they erected, there was such emotional power there. There's unimaginable emotional power there.
This is a huge topic, Edji, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about this principle that, people often, when they're looking at a guru-disciple relationship, they tend to have the idea that the guru is doing things and that the guru is acting as an individual. But is it not more perhaps accurate to say that it's the self or whatever you want to call it that's acting through the guru, and this dynamic of this guru-disciple relationship, and then what you're talking about, this environment created by other participants, all these things together create the dynamics that facilitate these dramatic spiritual shifts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And even more so than that, the concept of lineage is correct. There is a power in the lineage. That's why you get ordained in the lineage, because there's a sustaining power in Muktananda's lineage from Muktananda and from Rudy and from Nityananda and all of the others. You can feel that power that permeates. It's like the mass people there, with their devotion, with their surrender, makes up for a body that can manifest the power of the lineage. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
Same thing with Robert's lineage, Robert and Ramana. But with Robert and Ramana, it's very distant and removed, and there's not a lot of energy to it. It's different altogether. It's transcendent.
Interesting.
Chaitananda, who is one of Muktananda's swamis, has an extreme amount of this power. You go into his presence. He's a friend of mine. And you feel his gentleness. You feel his power. You feel his love. You feel how giving he is and how healing he is. I have a friend, Dia, who is a healer from Scotland, who saw Swamiji, and I just saw her fall apart in tears and practically collapse in his arms, and I could see the love shared between the two and her absolute devotion to him, and it was so moving. It was so moving. I wish, well, I guess I have a degree of power too, but not to the extent that he has. He's like an elder brother.
You know, I wonder if you might characterize for the viewers who a lot of my viewers, they don't hear a lot of what we're talking about. It's mostly
right.
Diet and health and veganism.
Right.
And I think people sometimes have trouble getting their heads around this devotion that can arise between a devotee and a guru. And, you know, like bhakti tears, you know, and I've had some of these experiences on a milder form than I think than yourself, but at least I've had them. And people who have not had them, they don't really know what it's like. And can you just describe what it's like? You know, you get into this presence, and I think you could take two people into the presence of a powerful person, and only one can perceive the power, because there has to be something in terms of your ability to recognize it.
Let me put it in two different ways. I'll give you an example of the feeling of the generic experience of seeing divinity by itself, and then with respect to a person. If you can imagine, you're approaching a large temple. It's supposedly the largest temple in America. And it supposedly has had many people had healing experiences and enlightenment experiences just by being in the presence within. So you come with an attitude of expectation, anxiety, hope, and then you pass through the door, and you're stunned by the size of the place inside, the magnificence of it all, the lights on the ceilings, the paintings on the ceilings, the size and the distance that the altar is away from you, the barest sense of the most beautiful ambrosia of incense, and a very subtle light descending from above that's cool, it feels healing. And the deeper you go in towards the altar, the more you feel this energy of grace descending. You feel your sins being washed away. And as you get closer and closer, you become emptier and emptier, until the light dropping turns gold. And the gold energy drops in you, and your body's tingling and shaking from this gold energy, which is lightening you. And you approach the throne, and in that throne there arises this bright, brilliant white light, like 1,000 spotlights aimed upwards. And as you approach it, you drop to your knees in utter surrender and gratitude for having this experience. And you just want to touch the feet of God and be like dirt beneath the feet, just to support His magnificent presence, which you don't even deserve to be in the presence of. It's so far beyond you. And you just stop. And that light then enters you. and you feel the power growing within you. You feel God's presence within you, all around you, manifesting this infinite power. And then you recognize that's you too. It's not just God, something other. It's also me. That's the short form. Okay. Now,
that's beautiful, beautiful.
With regard to seeing it in another person, there are two different examples. One was with Robert. When you see him, there's something very strange about Robert. His eyes don't blink. When he stares at you, you can feel him touching your genitals almost, or the depth of his vision. It goes down to your knees or to your toes. And absolute silence. No energy, nothing but quietness. And you feel like you're in the presence of an angel, but there's no energy associated with it. There's no love with it. It's just emptiness. On the other hand, I met, what was his name? A very famous psychotherapist from Rogers. What's Rogers' first name? Carl Rogers. When I met him, he was about 80 years old. He's fat. When he walked in the room, it was a group that was going to hear Carl Rogers on doing therapy. It was like the entire mood of the room changed from one of Southern California to one of kind of mystical London with a heaviness and a dampness. And he came and he sat down and everybody just watched him. You could feel his weight, not the weight of his body, but the weight, the majesty of his presence. The power of his presence, of being completely open emotionally as a being and extremely sensitive to every nuance in the environment. And I remember that as the most impactful experience I ever had, was to be in the presence of Carl Rogers. And I remember one question one of the therapists said, what happens if you're a Navy psychologist like we are, and we only have 6 visits with the patient before they go back to the front? What do you do in that sense? And Carl Rogers just paused and he said, you give them the 6 best therapy sessions they'll ever have. You just be with them in the presence. And that is, and then with Chaitananda, it's kind of a mixture of the two. Chaitananda doesn't have that deep emotional power of Carl Rogers, but he has the power of Kundalini, of Shakti. He's not an ordinary Swami that lives off the donations of his students and what's going on in the ashram, but he's owned many, many businesses and started many, many businesses, art business, carpet business, bakery, set up many, many ashrams. He has an ashram in Portland that is like covers 7 acres, the building. Huh. It used to be a retirement home, and he has like 2,000 people in the Portland community that call him their spiritual teacher, and they live in and around the ashram. And he also has meetings down here in Los Angeles. And when you see him, you see his generosity, you see his kindness, and yet there's a deep power. There's something like, beware of this guy, don't get on his wrong side, because he'll take your head off. And he says that comes from being a spiritual teacher for 40 years almost. Rudy made him a teacher at age 22. And he's 66 or 67 now. And he says that comes from 40 years of experience with students.
This brings up a whole huge topic I'd love to hear your thoughts on, which is frequently in spiritual circles, you'll get folks emphasizing the sweetness and love, which of course is so important and such a big part of things. But at certain times in a devotee's growth, it's necessary that they interact with someone who can really give them the shit, you know, can really knock them upside the head. The Zen master hitting the pupil with the shoe in the head. Can you talk about this, Edji? It's not that you can. A lot of the New Age things, they become saccharinely sweet, and there's an artificiality to it. There's something unreal and not right about this saccharine sweetness. Talk about that.
There is a wonderful video that you can find on YouTube that addresses this. My friend Shankarananda, Chaitananda, and Master Charles are being interviewed by Andrew Cohen. And I think the tape is called The Three Gurus. In it, they talk about the inner life of the guru-teacher relationship from the teacher's point of view. And mostly they have a struggle because they say they are the focal point of all the ugly projections that a person can think of. He said they get stabbed in the back. Everybody talks about the abuse of the student by the guru. Nobody talks about the abuse of the gurus by the students. How they're used, how they're copied, how they're plagiarized, how they go to the students come to them, they're healed, and they go away and disrespect you from a distance for some reason, because your projections can turn on a dime. At one time you need them, and you got what you want, or something like that, and then they do something else and they hate you. Chaitananda said one time he was giving a talk, and something made him stop the talk and walk down the street 3 buildings to where he entered one, and a woman had just given birth. The midwife was there, and the baby was choking to death, turning blue. And Chaitananda said he marched in, he grabbed the baby and slapped it on the ass and said, I gave it the biggest Shakti shock you could think of. And it coughed out something and started breathing. And then he said, I saved the baby's life, and now that woman hates me. I don't know what happened in the meantime, but if you build a very close relationship between the student and the guru, there are projections that go both ways. And as profoundly satisfying as it can get and nurturing, if either one turns the projections around, the shadow comes out. And the shadow has to be worked through, or else there is not that much progress. And what happens is most people run away as soon as the shadow comes out. They discount the value of the guru, and the guru can discount the value of the student. It can work either way. And the thing is, when you're feeling worst about your teacher or you're feeling worst about the student, that's the last time in the world that you should split up. This is the time where the real work of spiritual work of working through those deep shadow stuff is manifesting right in the presence.
Very interesting, very interesting. And would you say that sometimes what are perceived by outsiders as sexual scandals are the working out of some of these dynamics?
Absolutely, absolutely, because a man and a woman, doesn't matter who the teacher is, there's always going to be sexual feelings between them, because there is between men and women everywhere.
Right.
And what you do with those sexual feelings, you see, I'm not of this idea that these students are poor, what would you call it, abused students that are being used by the teachers, because some of these women that come into the Sangha throw themselves at the teacher. And it's really hard to resist them because they throw themselves so strongly. It happened to Chaitananda, it happened to me, it happens to almost all teachers. Matter of fact, I don't know of a teacher that I've ever studied with that was celibate. None of them, none of the Zen teachers. Muktananda certainly wasn't. Robert wasn't. Chaitananda wasn't. None of them. Chidvilasananda, none of them.
Yeah, yeah.
So, who's the abuser and who's the user? And it is a working through process. Also, I think that there's an energetic exchange that is spiritual that can take place in sex. And in the, but the thing is, there's so much negativity associated with it in our culture because of the paradigm of the doctor-patient relationship, the psychologist-patient relationship, the psychiatrist-patient relationship, that they're not considered to be consensual because of something about a power relationship. But, you know, there's a power relationship with women with athletes and women with actors and men with actors and so forth. That power is there in all relationships unless you've got the same job and are of the same socioeconomic status, which is very difficult to find. So there'll always be those kinds of things, and I think it's relatively harmless. If you're open to great jealousy, I say wonderful. Jealousy is such a wonderful feeling to experience and go through, because if you can identify with jealousy and take it into your heart, it becomes transformed into the greatest bliss, just as with sadness and depression. If you accept the depression, the grief, the loss, deeply enough and just let it abide there and to love that feeling and accept that feeling, eventually it turns into the greatest bliss. That's what emotions are good for. They can take you into the core of self. And if sex does it, all the better.
I love it. I love it. And would you say from your experience, you know, I've heard others, I think Eckhart Tolle has a line like this, that underlying noise, there's a silence that's say the bedrock or the foundation from which sound arises.
That goes back to the form is emptiness and emptiness is form.
Okay.
That's talking about abiding in emptiness as an experience and the silence. That's not reaching the absolute, nor is it reaching the Shakti, the sentience. It's just reaching the emptiness and abiding in the peace of emptiness.
Well, what I was going to ask you is, do you think that this play of emotions is analogous to that, in that emotions arise out of this ground of bliss? And as you were saying... Oh,
yeah. I never thought of that.
Okay.
I never thought of that.
And like you're saying, these emotions can be a gateway back to the bliss.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good thing, because, like, if you follow the I thought or the I feeling into emptiness, you can get into the emptiness. If you follow emotions, you can get into that underlying bliss, which is Sat Chitananda, existence, knowledge, bliss, which is the experience of Atman. But when you have that experience of Atman, what you have to do is have it enough times and deep enough that you identify with it as you, as opposed to you having that experience.
Oh, yes. That's where I am, because I had the experience once, and it remains an experience. So yeah.
And you have to have it repeated enough times that you own it as you. And with it comes such power, because for the first time in your life, you know who you are. Remember, I told you about wandering around for 20 or 30 years, not having a slightest clue, of having unlearned everything through Zen. Everything disappears into emptiness, leaving you clueless. But then when the self fills you up, that atomic explosion of energy and the descent of grace, you finally know who you are, because you become knowledge itself. You reach what knowingness really is, and part of you is just knowingness, as well as the knower inside, on the noumenal side, on the non-phenomenal side. There's the knower, but on the side of being, pure knowingness is at the core, along with love and bliss. Existence, knowledge, and bliss. Satchitananda, or Turiya, the fourth state, or the Atman. This is the external core of Shakti, of sentience. This is what's in existence. This is phenomenal. This is my human heart, my spiritual heart. But beyond that, behind that, is the witness, all of which just watches this unemotionally as the great receiver, Shiva. But I emphasize this life part. My God, who wants to go back into being a witness when you have all of this wonderful stuff happening out here?
Well, Yeah, and the way you talk about it, tell me if this is right. It sounds that since this transformation has occurred for you, your experience of the material world is heightened or enhanced by,
Yes, sir.
like, let's say, like sex or any other phenomenal event, because you have this way of relating to it. It's enhanced.
Everything is, yes. So much so. So much so.
Wow.
And your partners, too, because you share it. If you have a sexual partner or a love partner that is equally open to these energies and to the experiences, what a relationship.
Wow. Wow.
And that's why I advise people, as part of your sadhana, fall in love. But don't let it be a little love. Be a big one where you completely throw yourself away.
I love it.
And then use that love for the other. Feel that love so intensely that you identify with the love. And in that identification, you can say, I am love itself. Then when you are love itself, you're close to having a self-realization fellowship, because that is, or experience, because that is about as deep as you can go in terms of meditation or will, is into identification with love. Then it's up to God to show himself or herself to you. Shakti to reveal, like Krishna did to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, to reveal its majesty. And Arjuna couldn't do it. He said, stop, go back to normal. I can't take the grandiosity, because it is quite an experience. It is the most powerful experience you'll ever have, the self-realization fellowship relationship.
Yeah.
That just brings me back to self-realization fellowship, because that's how I got my start, was when I was age 13 or 14, is through Yogananda, who, is an incredible being in his own light.
Oh, that book was like a powerful catalytic force, that autobiography of Yogi. Incredible. And you're reminding me of what you're saying is reminding me of like Rumi and that poetry of love, which talks about the divine, but it's so grounded and earthy, and he had to have been a lover also,
Right.
And also Tantra. The whole thing of Tantra is finding the divine through sexuality.
Through sensuality, not just sexuality.
Yes, great point. Great distinction. I love that. And yeah, so beautiful. Now, one thing I want to ask you before it escapes me, and it's kind of back on another track, but that is, you mentioned the term vegetarian several times, and I wonder, can you talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on vegetarian and vegan, and do you think it's necessary to have any distinction?
Well, I got to tell you, I had a hip replacement operation a year and a half ago, because I couldn't move much because of the pain in my right hip. I still have pain in my left hip. And I gained 30 pounds. And I had students here that were taking care of me. So essentially I wasn't moving. I would get out of my chair to go to the bathroom, get out of my chair to go out and feed the cats, but I'd drive the car while they actually jumped out of the car and fed the cats and prepared the meals and so forth. And after gaining 30 pounds, I couldn't breathe. I would wake up in the morning suffocating. And it scared the hell out of me. And I went to a pulmonologist, and he says, you got to lose weight. And I've read about losing weight, and it says you have to have a high protein diet in order to lose weight. Otherwise, your muscles get absorbed as quickly as the fat gets absorbed. So I began drinking milk, eating cheese, and put some of the dairy protein in my diet, as well as getting supplemental stuff made out of, what was it made out of? I forget what it is. The whey supplements, in order to get enough calories protein calories to avoid muscle loss. And it makes me feel so fucking guilty to do it. But I've dropped 30 pounds and I can breathe in a very short period of time.
Unbelievable. Wow.
And as soon as I get down to where I'm supposed to be, I will immediately get off, and not even that, before I get down to that weight, I'm going to get off dairy. But right now, the dairy industry is so hideous. The use and abuse of milk cows for 4 or 5 years, and then turning them upside down and slitting their throats and letting them bleed out and hacking them apart. And then the male chicks, billions of male chickens fed into those grinders because they're useless in the egg industry. And it's so horrifying, the whole thing. And there's so much guilt in me to be even eating the milk, the milk products. That
well, I'm glad it's making you feel better, though. I mean, I'm glad you're not suffering as much. So that's good.
Suffering emotionally, but I'm suffering less physically.
Right.
Heading back, and the energies are even increasing as I'm losing weight.
Well, it's interesting that they gave you that prescription. So, yeah, I mean, I guess once you start moving around more, then that will help you maintain the musculature, and you won't have to rely on the protein.
Well, the thing is, if you exercise, what happens is the body says, I need a certain amount of muscles to do this exercise. So it's not that, it's what it is it's training the body to take more fat than it is muscle by doing exercise. And when you don't do so much, then the body says, well, they're both about the same. It's a little easier to process protein in the muscles than fat in fat. So I do exercise to try to maintain it, but it's you still lose muscle mass when you're losing weight rapidly.
All right. Well, are there any topics you'd like to add here? You've given me so much.
I know. I think we ought to do another interview again sometime in the future.
I would love that. So,
but I'd like to invite everybody to come to satsang on Sundays at 2 p.m. You can go to satsang with Edji, EDJI.weebly.com on 2 p.m.s on Sunday afternoons, California time. So that'd be like 11 on the East Coast, I guess. Wouldn't it? No, it's later. It'd be 5 p.m. on the West. And in England, it's 8 p.m., and in Germany, it's 9 p.m., I think, or something like that. But we have about 30 people that come, and we share the energies. And maybe you can print it somewhere with this film, satsangwithedji.weebly.com, and also my blog, because I usually post every day about what's happening with my sick cat and what we're doing and bonding and different kinds of teachings. I would love to have your audience come and see. You know, this is the best interview I've ever had because you really understand.
Well, Edji, thank you. It's a pleasure. It's just, I've admired you for a long time, and I got to tell people your site is a wealth of information. I mean, if you're interested in enlightenment, awakening, from a practical and a real explanation with a lot of detail and information from some of the greatest teachers, go to Edji's site, which is wearesentience.com. It's a very valuable resource. I mean, you got a lot of stuff up there, and some of the stories you recount are just amazing.
Especially the Zen stories, huh?
Yeah, and well, the whole thing with, I think, Robert's wife is illustrative.
Nicole, yeah.
You know, that's amazing that even had to happen, and just very fascinating story. Fascinating story.
It is.
Thank you for being so gracious and just so free with it all.
Thank you for having me, because I felt that this was such a sharing. You got exactly what I was talking about, and I know exactly the kind of questions you were answering and I thought I answered them the best way I could, and you seemed to understand and to appreciate what I was offering. So this has been a wonderful experience for me.
Well, I'm so glad. Thank you for taking the time.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Take care, Edji. Take care.
Bye-bye.